So I work as a coach, one-to-one with senior executives, and also as a team coach with senior management teams. And I've been happy to also have done some work with Sheraa, with the founders, and very supportive of your work in Sheraa, Sally. I also train other people to be coaches. I feel it's such a fantastic profession. It can be such a powerful good in our world today, especially today. So delighted to be able to develop other people to come into this profession. I have a background in the corporate world and in public services. So delighted to be with you today.
Thank you, Linda, for that introduction. And I think just sharing with everyone the kind of work that you've been doing, and also how involved you are with the work that we do at Sheraa. And as team members, we've worked together very, very closely with the Sheraa team as well. And I think one of the things that actually makes this interesting is how this entire situation, or how these entire times are quite different for entrepreneurs specifically. Obviously, there's a lot of businesses, and even on a personal level, when it comes to families and friends, that are being impacted with a lot of the things that are happening around us. And I think entrepreneurs specifically have a bit of a different challenge, or a more unique challenge to everyone else. And I just wanted to kind of bring that out and see what your thoughts on that, based on your experience. How do you feel entrepreneurs experience these current times and changes differently than everyone else?
I think that entrepreneurs by nature are generally risk takers, and they are people who are, in my experience, adaptable and open to change. So I think when the dust settles on this, that entrepreneurs probably will be one of the first groups to come up out of the pit of uncertainty and begin to see the opportunities that are here. I think it's a little early for most people to feel they're coming into that point just yet. I think we have to process what is going on and the impact of what is going on our businesses, on our business ideas, on where we are in the life cycle of developing those businesses. But I think that overall entrepreneurs will be a leading light in really regrouping and rebuilding the economy once the dust settles. Having said that, I mean, entrepreneurs are humans as well. And I think on today's call, we're going to focus very much on the journey in. I know in your series, you will have a lot of input on how to fund, how to maintain your momentum, how to market, etc. You know, very tangible stuff. But today, I think we need to look at our own human response, and that after all, no matter what title we are a person. And in my view now of coaching people right around the globe online through this, everybody is feeling the effect in one way or another. It is deeply emotional. It's a roller coaster for most people.
Definitely. And I think you mentioned something, that it might be a bit too early for us to currently see things settling, and be able to kind of see the other side of things, for the lack of better words. But because this is more of a processing time for a lot of founders and a lot of entrepreneurs, regardless of what stage their business at. You know, currently a lot of these founders are in the process of just kind of understanding what's happening around them, all of these changes. What I wanted to kind of ask you was, what does that process look like when you're faced with these challenges and these changes, and this fast-paced changes that we're currently having? What does that process of figuring things out or processing look like, from the entrepreneur's point of view?
Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that this level of uncertainty is unprecedented. And most of us will be picking up generalized anxiety, feelings of what's going to happen, what's new, what's wrong today. And that will trigger our amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. And the emotional center will automatically go into one of three modes: flight, fight, or freeze. And I think it's very interesting just for us all to take a moment and say, where am I tending to find myself within those three options? Because the brain, when there is so much uncertainty, the normal patterns that the brain searches for just aren't there. And that will release, once the amygdala is triggered, there'll be an awful lot of adrenaline in the system. So are you finding yourself, you know, I talked to our audience today, are you kind of frozen? Do you get up in the morning intending to make calls, intending to do things, but kind of procrastinate, put things off? Are you scrolling social media endlessly? Or are you in flight mode? Are you kind of in denial still? Are you still thinking this will blow over in a week? This won't be so bad. My business will be okay. I don't really need to think about that right now. I don't really want to talk about that right now. Or are you in fight mode, that you're saying, I'm going to hit this head on. This really isn't going to happen. I'm going to power through this. And it's just interesting to note, and I might ask the audience, just right this moment in the chat function, Sally, if that's okay, just take a moment to think, am I in freeze, flight, or fight? Where are you right now? Maybe you're in all three. Just type in where you think you are. I just love to know with the audience, take a temperature there.
Definitely, yeah. So, I mean, you guys can go ahead, and I can already see the comments coming in and everyone chatting. So, go ahead and write how you guys are feeling. And as you were talking, Linda, to be honest, even from a personal perspective, I can see also through the day how you can move through some of these phases or situations. I think one question, as the audience kind of bring in their answers and what they think about where they're at right now. Are you in each of those states in isolation, or do you kind of move past them on all three during the day, or is it during the week? How does the transition happen, or are you experiencing them in isolation?
I think that we will have a default one. And what's interesting for me is a lot of people have come into the chat function saying fight. And maybe that is a hallmark of entrepreneurs. What I would say is that we will have a default one. Mine last week was frozen. I was completely frozen, which is not like me at all. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a real go-getter, I'm focused, but I was frozen last week. And I think the first step to moving through trauma, because this is akin to a trauma, it's acknowledge what's happening, acknowledge your feelings, get in touch with that soft, fluffy stuff, and just notice that rather than deny it. And actually be kind to yourself right now. Don't expect yourself to be as productive as you normally are. Don't expect yourself to be performing at a standard right now that you would normally be at. So a bit of self-compassion, become your own best friend, have moments in the day where you treat yourself even to a lovely cup of coffee, or you make yourself a really nice sandwich, whatever it is. Just have those moments where you can soothe yourself. But do notice that you are in an emotional hijack right now. Some of us will, though, thrive on chaos. And I speak as someone who's married to somebody like that. My husband initially got a real surge of energy from what was going on, the chaos, the adrenaline rush that brought. But just be aware that you might be on that wave, but that wave will crash, because as you pump that much adrenaline, you're also releasing cortisol into your system, which really will hamper your immune system long term, which is not a good thing in COVID-19 terms. But you will kind of come off of that wave. So it's not judging yourself. It's not being hard on yourself. I would just invite people to do that, check in with their emotional state and be okay with that, because that's where moving towards problem solving in the medium to longer term will start.
Definitely, and I think you mentioned something right now where you said check in on yourself and acknowledge that and be okay with that. And I think one thing that I also want to kind of touch on or talk about is once that state of acknowledgement happens, what's the next step? So you've mentioned some of the things that, and maybe we can recap on those, some of the things that people can use to recognize what state of mind they're in. Are they in fight or flight or freeze? How can they recognize that? But then what happens once you recognize that? What's the next step for you in terms of acknowledging, after you acknowledge the state of mindset that you're at?
Yeah, I think that we have to also acknowledge that we are creatures of habit. You know, when we think about a normal day, you know, we have a set time we used to get up at, we would go through our morning ablutions, we would get our stop for our coffee on the way. You know, we had all little routines worked out that set us up for our working day and got us through the working day. I think for most of us, what's happened is those routines have gone out the window. And in the absence of routine, our actually prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that does all the high level thinking, the strategic thinking, the negotiation, all of that great stuff, just won't function. It'll become overwhelmed because we need to build new habits now. And this is where, starting today, if people haven't already, what new routines, what new habits are you creating within your working day to get through? And even in your free time in the evening, because we're not out and about, we're not socializing the way we do, we don't have all those connections that we took for granted, we don't have our sessions in the gym. So what new routines or new habits are you going to create? And again, we know it probably takes 21 days for those new habits to emerge. But once the habits are embedded, what that does is it creates a sense of security, emotional security within us. And it means we can begin to come back into a more focused work ethos. So I would just ask people, what new routines or habits are they beginning to evolve right now? So just please share. I think it's really good if we can share with each other what is sustaining us. And I'm also go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to kind of bring this up because we've received through the chat from Mayasa, and what she mentioned is that she now kind of gives herself the permission to slow down and simply be, and not necessarily be fighting 24/7. And I think it would be actually interesting to kind of know a little bit more, how do you slow down? Because around us we have family things going as they are, business, and from a professional side, things are going as they are. So I would like to ask you, Mayasa, to just kind of share with us how do you slow down? And just like Linda was saying, what kind of habits did you find yourself getting into as you were consciously slowing down? And so to that, Linda, one question, as everyone's kind of writing in their comments and sharing things, one question that I have that might also help people that maybe are in the process of creating those habits or building out these habits. What would you classify as a good habit to have? How do you recognize what works with you or what doesn't? Because I think we find a lot of content online about what things to do and how to tackle this, and how can you make changes to your day in order to create healthy habits. But in the end, whatever works for me doesn't necessarily work for everyone else. So how do you kind of go about designing those habits or building out these habits?
I think simply it'll be a bit of experimentation because quite frankly, none of us really have been in this position before. My advice is find what gives you joy. What small moments in every day, what habit could support joy in your life that would relieve the stress of what's going on, that would give you a boost, that would release the positive brain chemicals of dopamine, which gives us a sense of satisfaction that we maybe have achieved a small goal, or serotonin that makes us feel proud about something we've done, or oxytocin, which we get when we bond or connect with other people. So my view is, I think Mayasa is so right, slowing down, not been too hard on ourselves, not expecting us to move the mountain right now, but also thinking about what gives me joy and can I bring a little bit of that into my life. For instance, I had my daily outing 2 days ago when I was up in Spinneys, and I love spring flowers, and I saw a bunch of yellow daffodils, and it just gave me so much joy to enjoy
These are
them.
lovely.
Yeah, small things. So I'm just, has anybody else shared what
Yeah, so
habit?
I mean, it's interesting just because I'm keeping an eye on the chat as well, and it's very, and I'm listening to what you're saying, and it's funny and heartwarming kind of how it all resonates and ties together, because we have people that are writing in saying that they have completely changed their routine and they start out their morning differently. And we have things as small as we now open, or I now open all the curtains that are in my house. And I think it really kind of just talks back to the importance of focusing not necessarily on a major change or a small change. It's just really focusing on what brings about joy and what kind of helps sets you back in a better place mentally and psychologically. So it's
Yeah,
very interesting to kind of see all of this coming in.
I can see it. Yeah, you see people almost naturally finding what's going to bring them back into some sense of balance, some sense of control. That really is critical to emotional resilience, that we feel we are controlling some elements in our lives, like, you know, when we have coffee, what coffee we have, even small things like that uh,
Yes,
help.
yes.
The other thing I'm thinking of, Sally, is I've been a solopreneur for many years, and so I have an office set up. And it's even a strange experience for me, but I'm conscious that there may be other people out there who had office spaces. So having to bring the office home, it's a huge disruptor. As I said, for people, we are all human and creatures of habit. So again, something to think about, if have any of you kind of zoned your house so that at least maybe when it comes to meal time, you're not eating out of a box amid all the computers and papers that you've been working on every day. So there's something about boundaries and separating our personal life and our work life somewhat. It mightn't be easy if you don't have a large living space, but I would ask people to think about that. Has anybody done that sort of zoning boundaries?
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing people saying that they abstain from their couch until 4 p.m. and they're not kind of allowing themselves to go in there.
Yeah,
And as they're writing these things, and I just want to give everyone a chance to kind of write out their experience as well. Just sharing some of mine. So I live in a one-bedroom apartment, so there isn't much room to create boundaries or zones in that sense. But one thing that I found very useful is I actually stick to my lunch hour and I make sure that I cook something. So I enjoy cooking. It's very therapeutic or cathartic for me. And for me to have that midday, so around 1 p.m. or 2 p.m., just to go ahead and cook something very quick. First of all, it's not as time consuming as I thought it was, but I come back much more refreshed. Obviously, I'm eating more healthy, so I definitely, energy wise, I'm also at a much better place. And so I think it's also very interesting, even if you don't have that room in your living space to create different zones or to kind of have those boundaries. It could be the smallest things that you can use to kind of create those small bubbles psychologically for you.
Great, great, Sally. And people are adding to this conversation. Somebody has a standing desk, somebody has bought themselves a recliner. So you can see where we find what's comfortable for us. It is very personal, but I think this is the moment to find what works for us. The other interesting thing I'm finding, and I'm taking this as a huge positive out of the whole experience, is that
Yes.
we've become much more human. So when I'm having business meetings or coaching sessions online, you know, people have their kids sitting on their knee, or they have their dog sitting on their knee. And, you know, before we had always that quite artificial separation. I'm just enjoying that facet. And I hope we don't lose that when we go back to the new
Definitely.
normal. Yeah.
Yeah, uh, I've had actually a couple of because in the office, typically what would have happened if we're having a long day is that we'd have coffee breaks. And so one of the things that I started doing with my colleagues is having these kind of virtual coffee breaks to also
Mm,
just connect with the team members. Because again, if you're used to working in a team setting where it's very collaborative, you're feeding off of each other's energy, and then you're suddenly stuck on your couch or on your desk for 6, 7, 8 hours at a time, it becomes also hard to also continue to stay creative
yeah.
and working hard at what you do.
Yeah, that's so true, Sally. I'm glad you brought up the social connection aspects, because ultimately the social brain really controls much of us, what we do, and it's a huge piece of our mental well-being in all of this. And, you know, there's nothing like talking with people, and perhaps now is the time to do more talking, even if it's virtual, rather than email and WhatsApp messages. um, I just find that we're all craving that connection. And I think that anybody who has a team, maybe we have some founders here who have a team, and I'd love to know how they're maintaining well-being among the team. Okay, some work will have to go on, goals will have to be met, deadlines met, etc. But what are you specifically doing more of at the moment to support your team? Because whatever we're experiencing, others are experiencing as well. We're all on this emotional roller coaster together. So again, I'd
Definitely, and I
invite
think
people to put in the, sorry, Sally, just if people could put in
it's
the
okay.
chat function what they're doing more of with their teams. And as you say, to kind of supplement what people might be missing.
Yeah, and I think again, just giving people the chance to kind of write those into the chat function. I think what I wanted to ask is, what are some of the things that you've kind of seen as drastic changes in terms of how entrepreneurs are or founders are kind of dealing with their team or interacting with their team, and what are your thoughts on that?
I know it's kind of a pressurized time for the founders and entrepreneurs. You have a lot on your plate right now. You have maybe worries about things because all the assumptions you maybe had based your business plan, some of those assumptions aren't valid right now. What I would be saying is connect, connect, connect. Try and prioritize that connection with your team. Make, again, this is part of the habits, you know. So is it, if perhaps in the past when you were working all together in an office space you had a team meeting once a week, I would be saying you need to double or treble that now. So it doesn't have to be for a long period of time, but I would be suggesting you need more regular checkups with the team, and also some one-to-one reach out at least once a week. And even if it's not about work, but how are people coping, how, especially those who are living alone, How are they managing? So I think that this has to be high on the to-do list every day. And that can, as I say, become a new habit.
Definitely. So just reading out some of the audience's experiences. Lenka, for example, checks in more often with her junior staff, and especially those that live alone and they're by themselves. And so she makes sure she kind of calls them several times a day to check in, not just necessarily about work, but also on a more personal level. And then we have Nora, who manages two teams who on total are 14 kind of student workers, and they make sure to kind of have coffee catch-ups every couple of weeks with her team to kind of help keep everyone connected. And I think, and again, because with startups, a lot of these teams tend to be spread out and they're not geographically in the same space. I think one question that we got, and I think we might kind of answer that quickly, is do you how often do you kind of recommend, or do you suggest we check in with the teams more specifically?
I think, it's hard to generalize on that, Sally, but I would say whatever you used to do in the past and worked for you, multiply that by 3.
Definitely.
So if
Yeah.
you used to meet once a week, meet 3 times a week, even if it's for short periods. I think that the thing that is going to get us through all of this and out the other side is the human connection, our empathy, our compassion. This is a time for us as leaders to show that side of ourselves. And I think the loyalty that that will engender will serve you well as you need your teams to pull out the stops once we're through this.
Definitely. And I think just drawing back to some of the examples that I've had talking to some of our founders at Sheraa, um, is that typically they're currently kind of caught between in a very difficult spot, because with everything kind of changing and everything being uncertain, a lot of their team members um, look for them for answers, and they look for them for kind of a clear way ahead and mapping the road forward. Um, and while that is also happening, it's also important for them to kind of maintain that transparency and knowing that they don't necessarily know the answer. They're not necessarily sure how things are going to look like a month from now or 2 months from now in terms of the business, in terms of the team formation. And I think a lot of founders kind of face that difficult spot, and it's kind of, it would be challenging to find a balance between being fully transparent and vulnerable with their team, but also being there as a kind of like a guiding light through these times. So just wanted to kind of ask you and kind of probe a little bit on what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. Um, I think there's a lot we don't know. And the worst thing we could do is give false information or the fake news, as we might call it. There may be a temptation
Yes.
to want to reassure people. You might want to protect your team, and you may give false assurances. My view is to be authentic. Share what you do know, but share what you don't know. I would also think it is a positive as a leader to show some level of vulnerability and to say, yeah, I'm having a hard day today, or yesterday wasn't great for me, but I'm better today, or I don't have that answer. To be able to do that, because in essence, we will role model and give others permission to express what they're feeling. Because just because the team mightn't talk about how they're feeling doesn't mean that those feelings aren't there. So in a way, as the leader, you have to give people permission to express it. Because again, just from my coaching work over 20 years, what I find is that when people become aware of their emotional state, express it to another person, that's half the way to recovery. That's half the way of getting over it. You process it by sharing and saying it aloud. So, and the quicker people process it, the quicker they can move into being, productive again. So, of course, at the end of the day, one of the things you need as an entrepreneur is to have your inner compass fixed, so you do need to know what are your core values? What are the things, and I'd ask people to share this in the chat function. What are the maybe 2 or 3 core values that you have that will not be shaken by COVID-19? What are the 3 things that you hold most dear? And I think if you are in tune with what they are and you communicate those to the team, the team will get some sense of security from that. And it will also help you focus and find your way out of this maze. But people that don't have that North Star, that clear 3 or 4 guiding principles in their lives, they will be swept up in this perfect storm.
I agree. I definitely agree. And I think just one of the people that are kind of tuning in just kind of shared self-belief, persistency, and hard work. And I think Ammar, I
Mm-hmm.
think these are all kind of great things to have, just like Linda said, like guiding principles. Nora is also sharing strong work ethos, authenticity, and transparency. And I think that's completely important. Thank you for sharing that, Nora. And also putting people first. And it's important that we're checking on each other as a team and taking care of each other. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of share some of those things as well as we kind of continue the discussion, because I really think a lot of these values and a lot of these guiding principles, I like the way that you put it, Linda, is a key way for us to kind of navigate a lot of what's happening here. Because I think that the typically if COVID-19 wasn't, for example, happening and you're having a hard time, or things are maybe stressful at work or at home, there's usually someone to turn to, right? There's a friend who's maybe coming in with a different energy that you can turn to. You could sometimes even turn to your team or your family. And I think one thing that's unique to this situation is that everyone is uniquely challenged. And there's also that burden of having to kind of unload on someone else. And I think having those kind of guiding principles is a way as that could be used more or less as a self-preservation during this time, if you're unable to kind of have that conversation, or kind of just lean on someone else as well.
Yeah, very true, Sally. And I just love the values people are coming up with. And take time to discuss those with your team, with your investors, with your ecosystem, and see how you can model more of those, because they really are our essence. And I don't believe our essence. I think our essence is going to be protected. Some of the conditions we're working in will certainly change, but who we are, who we are will still be there in a year's time, 2 years' time.
Definitely. And just
I've lost you, Sally.
we have Yeah, so I was just kind of sharing, going through the chat for some of the things that people are sharing. And I think Jessica March is talking about gratitude, hope, and parity. And I think just kind of going through these comments, I think a lot of them are going back to our initial point, which is the journey inwards and the importance of kind of looking into what we do in our state as a method for us to kind of cope with everything. It's very interesting to also see some of those naturally kind of come up as people share their guiding principles and share their values that they're holding on to during these times as well.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, the silver lining, maybe ultimately in all of this, is that we will all begin to see, as a society, as a group of entrepreneurs, of pioneers, that frenetic activity and is really not the essence of success. That maybe that slowing down, connecting with values, connecting with who we are as a leader, connecting with the team around us, that we can build something stronger ultimately. I think maybe, and I can admit, perhaps as a recovered workaholic, that yes, I spent at least 2 decades of my life chasing my tail, believing that running around busy, 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 not having a minute in the diary was actually a measure of my productivity. More and more, I'm realizing time for reflection is important, time to be mindful, allowing myself slow down. Actually, the road
Definitely.
it comes lots of different ways.
Yeah, and I think that brings about the importance of kind of self-care and empathy, self-empathy. And I think it's also because a lot of these founders are kind of taking it upon themselves to kind of deliver and perform during these times. And I think that the importance of being able to kind of make that judgment of maybe I don't need to be currently in fight mode, or I don't need to constantly be pushing myself. And the concept of self-empathy is something that's also important to highlight during these times.
Yes, yes. And the other aspect of that, Sally, is positive self-talk. And, you know, we all have a strong inner critic, particularly people who are high achievers. You know, often they achieve because they have this chatter in their head, you have to do better, you're not good enough, prove yourself. I don't know if anybody has experienced some of that inner talk in their head. And what we know is that the memory, the hippocampus part of the brain, will remember negative thoughts 3 times more than a positive thought. So in a time like this, we actually consciously have to say positive things to ourselves to balance the negative that will just automatically flood our brain. So, you know, this may sound a little flaky to people, but affirmations. Do any of you have affirmations, which is just a simple sentence you say to yourself, and say it as often as you can throughout the day? You can change it each day, or you can keep the same one. So it could be, you know, I am doing my best in a tough time. I am doing my best in a tough time. And interestingly, you don't realize it, but subconsciously, that is reprogramming your brain to be more at rest, less stressed, less judgmental on yourself. I don't know if anybody has ever tried affirmations, or what is it they need to tell themselves each day. I'd love people to try to think about an affirmation that they could take with them for the rest of the day.
Definitely, and I think just sharing some of the things that are coming through the chat. Mayasa talks about her repeating what you just mentioned, that you're doing your best during these times, and she kind of repeats that every morning. And I think a lot of what you're saying and how you kind of break it down on a more scientific level allows us to understand really the importance of these things, because I do think that a lot of people, we tend to kind of take it for granted, right? The ability to kind of say those things out loud to ourselves every now and then, to allow ourselves to actually compliment or just affirm ourselves in that way. And I think one thing that's kind of coming up in the chat where Ahmad is sharing is that affirmations, he fears that affirmations will lock him in a comfortable place, in a comfort zone, where else he always wants to kind of challenge himself. So I'm curious to know what you have to say to that.
Great question. I guess it depends on your affirmation. You know, if your affirmation is, I succeed, I meet my goals, I do the very best I can, for instance, these to me are very striving affirmations. Um, Rather than, you know, I fail, I'm no good. It's counteracting the negative stuff that just automatically comes up. I mean, for me, I have a number of affirmations, but if I can share, be personal here. One of my affirmations is, I am good enough. And what I found was, you know, and the questioner may feel that that would dumb down their performance, but I have to remind myself that I am good enough and that I don't have to do everything and be everything every moment of the day. And what I have found as I have embraced that thought, that actually I am more in balance and I actually have enjoyed more success because
Yeah.
I'm not focusing on the doing, I'm focusing more on the being. I don't know if that helps answer that question.
Definitely, and I think just as you're kind of talking about this, I would have to say that I might have been kind of slightly out of touch. I haven't practiced saying those affirmations for a while, but I want to thank you. And while everyone is kind of sharing, I also want to thank people for being very open and sharing these things with us. I think it really kind of adds to how open of a discussion we can have, knowing that this is a safe space, and I love how everyone's kind of sharing their experience. And thank you for doing the same, Linda, as well.
My pleasure.
I think another thing that's also kind of come up during some of the things that people are sharing on social media, and one thing that I think Jessica kind of shared on the chat is she mentioned that one of her affirmations is "This too shall pass." Um, and I wanted to kind of ask out of curiosity, um, how much should these affirmations be centered about what you do as opposed to the surrounding environment, and if that makes a change, or does it make a difference as well?
You know, I don't think there's hard and fast rules, Sally, and particularly in today's world, I'm moving less and less away from rules. My view is do what works for you. Whatever brings you back into balance, whatever centers you, do. And get those new habits, form those new thoughts that bring you to that place of center. Because in center, we can then move forward. That allows us access, as I said earlier, the prefrontal cortex, which is the highest thinking part of the brain. And really, we can't get there. And this is where all our creativity will come from, our great problem solving, our strategic thinking. We can't get there without being in balance and emotionally centered first.
Thank you for sharing those tips, Linda. And I think a lot of people are finding this very helpful. I'm just kind of going through the chat, and I love that everyone's kind of sharing and writing things as well. And I think they're finding this very helpful. I think one thing that I also wanted to kind of just take this conversation and make sure that we kind of shed light on is that how does how do entrepreneurs and founders kind of take a lot of the work that they do to balance themselves and center themselves, and then transition that onto the team as well, because there's a different dynamic in terms of a relationship there. And we talked about, for example, frequent check-ins, and chatting with the team members and scheduling virtual coffee. But I think a lot of what we had just kind of touched upon is very much more personal, and much more deeper. And I'm curious to know, how can founders and entrepreneurs kind of help their team members do the same, as they do and as they go through that journey through themselves as well?
Yeah. And this is amazing. I'm a great fan of the neurosciences, and particularly a new emerging field called neuro leadership, which is what we know about leadership blended with the neuroscience. And what we know is that emotions are completely contagious, and that the leader who is in balance, the leader who is emotionally intelligent, the leader who has empathy and balance, actually subliminally passes that on to the team. And the reverse is true. The leader who is scattered, who is unemotionally intelligent, and who is very, very stressed, will pass that on to the team. So in times of infection, and we're fighting this pandemic, wouldn't it be lovely to have an epidemic of positive leadership emotion at the moment? Because and it's not just for our team, Sally, it's for our best friends, it's for our spouses, it's for our
That's
children.
true. That's true.
People will pick up on this. It becomes a way of life.
And I think one thing that you mentioned that actually I found very interesting is how naturally this transition happens, the state of mind of the founder or the leader in this case, and how that transitions to the team. And I think it's also, it kind of ties up to what we were talking about earlier, where founders feel the responsibility to kind of push on and work harder and deliver a lot during these times. And I think what you just kind of mentioned just highlights the importance of leaders being able to take care of themselves so they can take care of their team members as well.
Yeah, and I think, taking self-care is not being selfish, and that is because, the old adage on the plane, in case of emergency, put your own oxygen mask on first before you help anybody else.
Yes, yes, yes.
So it's kind of, yeah, it's not selfish. It's actually necessary for, I think, the viability of your business or your project going forward, that you do some of this work. You still have to do all the managing. I'm not saying you don't have to do, the operational day-to-day stuff, but make some time for this journey in, as we were calling it this morning, Sally.
I agree, and I think just as we've kind of tackled a couple of points, and I think one interesting thing to be able to talk about and to also address is how much of the news and the things that are happening around us tends to also affect a lot of those relationships and a lot of the efforts that we try to do as we thrive and as founders thrive within their businesses. And I just wanted to kind of get an understanding from you on how founders can help. It could be limit that kind of impact from external news sources. It could be other networks. But what can they do in order for them to kind of regulate a lot of the information that is coming outside in, that is affecting the team and their morale?
Yeah. Yeah, we're deluged, aren't we? We're deluged 24/7 news, and most of it is frightening. Most of it is negative. So I'd love to know how, and I'd invite the audience to share here. We do have to go on a diet. We have to be on a diet of news and input, because when we go overload, when we overdose or overeat on that, we raise our levels of anxiety. We become less productive. We become overwhelmed, because not only are we trying to deal with our own family, with our own business idea, we almost feel we have to cope with the world. So I would be interested to know how other people limit that, and again, it's an added challenge because we're all working from home now, and we may have TVs dotted around the house, and it's easy to leave the TV or a news feed on your computer, on your laptop, so that you're getting constant bombardment. I tend to, just myself, it works for me, but it mightn't work for everyone. I do a check-in in the morning as to the state of play around the world for about 20 minutes. And then I probably do an hour at about 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, where I choose a good news channel and get news there. But that works for me. But I'd love to know what others are doing.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to give everyone kind of a chance to also share their experiences and what they do in order to kind of limit the influx of information and news, good and bad, that is coming in now that we actually are spending more time at home, more time with our devices, more time on social media, and how that kind of impacts us. And as people are kind of writing in their responses, One thing that I wanted to kind of also kind of quickly check in on you on is how how our responsibility in terms of sharing a lot of that news with people that are close to us. I've had conversations with friends and family where there's a lot of kind of in terms of sharing news and sharing information. There's much more awareness and much more mindfulness on what the other person needs to hear. And I'm curious to know how that translates into a team setting as well, in terms of the overall news that are related to kind of COVID-19. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I see. I think, oh, hi. I see people I know from my old AUS days, Jessica and Ali. There may be other people I know anyway. Just say hi to those. Um, yeah, I think it's just being selective, and it's the choice between being overwhelmed and what do you need to know. Now that might be slightly different for each of us, Sally, but the thing we're trying to avoid here is overwhelm. And I find someone's mentioned those WhatsApp groups, and I'm in loads of WhatsApp groups, and it's not negative stuff that's coming through there, but it's all these jokes and videos. I'm swamped with those. So this week I've just decided enough. um, because again, it's such a waste of my time and energy. I found, responding, watching, hours could go by. So it's not even just negative stuff, but it's all this other associated bombardment of information and input.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. And I'm just kind of sharing some of the things that people are putting onto the chat. For example, Lena mutes her WhatsApp groups just because of the overload of news that kind of happens. Ali and Mayaz as well kind of consciously limit not just the amount of time that they subject themselves to these news and information, but even the source of which they tend to go to.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that Amani mentioned, and I think a lot of us might relate to this, is that in the beginning she was actually checking the news all the time, checking a
Mm,
lot of the information that's passed around all the time, and now she's kind of consciously limiting that to 2 or 3 times a day, in order not to kind of force herself to think about that.
yeah.
And so it's interesting to kind of see what people kind of also experienced before and what kind of led them to this new strategy or this new way to consume a lot of the news and information that's being out there.
Yeah. And I think, all these things, it's a process. Like when we realized we were in a pandemic, this was so new, we were all keen to get information. Um, However, as the situation has continued, we're beginning to reassess how much information do we need each day. So that's just part of the process we're going through. And, we're going to change as we go through that. That's healthy, and adapt. And I think what I'm seeing in the chat function, most people are coming to the point that less is more, really, about this. And I'd also add a point, Sally, that um, who we choose to talk to is also so important. We have some people in our circle who are wonderful people, but they are kind of the naysayer type, prophets of doom. So
Yes, yes.
I just find myself at the moment drawn towards people who maybe are, more positive, are able to talk about other topics. It just gives me a mental break from it all.
Definitely. And I think, Linda, I just want to, and we spoke about this earlier when we started the session, and how it's important for us to give ample time for Q&A. And before we kind of move ahead to answer some of the questions that are being asked by the audience, I want to go ahead and kind of recap some of the things we talked about, because in the beginning we started off talking about the importance of the journey inwards and how a lot of the kind of strategies or coping strategies that we can come up with or we can do actually start off by being, first of all, aware of what our response is in times of uncertainty. Is it fight or flight or freeze? how we can kind of identify that, and then what do we do after we've acknowledged that we're in this particular state of mind. How can we kind of help center ourselves and balance what we kind of go through. And then we kind of went ahead and also discussed how that translates on a team level, and what kind of habits that we can do, not just to center ourselves, but also bring about more of the connection and more of the unity that the teams experience, especially now that they're all working, most of them are working remotely. And I think the other thing that we kind of also touched on is the importance of self-empathy, self-care, and how leaders and founders' role is to actually be able to take care of themselves, because their state of mind naturally kind of transcends into the team as well, and kind of cascades through. And I thought that was very, very interesting. And for me personally, that's one of the main takeaways for this. And these are kind of some of the things that we kind of highlighted. And I wanted to kind of just wrap and kind of reiterate some of those things, because I feel a lot of them are kind of useful, or key points that a lot of the audience members have also shared and resonated with. And before we kind of move into the Q&A, I just wanted to kind of ask you, Linda, if there was anything else that we maybe might have missed or not spent more time on, that you would like to kind of go back and highlight, or just reiterate.
I think perhaps the one thing we didn't touch on, Sally, and thanks for that excellent recap, it's just the whole idea of being mindful, and mindfulness practice can be very, very helpful in terms of reducing the stress and the adrenaline, in terms of bringing more focus and helping us kind of integrate with ourselves in this time of huge, turmoil. So again, maybe that might be something we could explore later on in another session, the practice of mindfulness.
Definitely. And I think just because you kind of brought this up, and I think we hear this term a lot in on social media. We hear a lot of things related to kind of mindfulness kind of coming up, whether it's on a team perspective or even on a personal aspect. And I just wanted to kind of understand very quickly from you, how does one, or how does an entrepreneur or a founder kind of practice that within themselves first, and also within the team. And I'd like to also kind of, because it's very important, I'd like to also spend some time also talking about that and share that with the audience.
Well, what we could do, if people are up for it, is have a quick mindful pause if people would like to try it out. It might be better than explaining it if I just lead people through a 1 minute, even just a 1 minute flavor of mindfulness. What do you think, Sally?
Definitely. I think people are up for it as well. They're already saying, yes, please do.
Okay, lovely. Thanks for being such a great audience today. Okay,
Definitely,
I invite
yes.
you now to put your feet, 2 feet firmly flat on the ground. I ask you to sit up as straight as you can in your chair. Find a nice, alert posture. I ask you to just put your hands in your lap, palms upwards and open, so you can receive the goodness of this world. You may, if you like, close your eyes, just gently shut your eyes. Or you may prefer to put your focus, kind of a soft focus, on an object in the distance. So whatever feels good for you, and we'll start. And we're going to begin with 3 really, really deep breaths. So I would like you to breathe in through your nose to 5. 3, 2, 1. Hold that breath. 3, 2, 1. And now through your mouth, very, very slowly exhale. Really long, slow exhale. 3, 2, 1. Now, if we can take the second breath. So in through your nose. Nice and slow. Hold. And begin a slow exhale. Exhale whatever you need out of your body right now, out of your mind. And now let's do a third conscious breath. So in through the nose, take in beautiful, fresh oxygen. Hold that breath, let it circle around your chest. Feel your chest and your abdomen expanding with that beautiful big breath. And now begin a slow exhale, really slow exhale, all that you don't need right now from your body. Now, as we go through another minute of practice, keep your breath going. Just keep breathing slowly. Follow your breath. And when your mind wanders, that's perfectly fine. When your mind wanders, just notice it, say breath, and come back to the focus of the in, the hold, and the exhale. What I want you to do now is just as you keep breathing, check in around the heart area. Just check in. What feelings can you sense there? What feelings can you access? And again, just notice them. They could be positive, they might be negative, they might be nothing. It's all perfect. Just notice what you're feeling right now, not an hour ago, not yesterday, right now. Connect with that feeling and send a breath to that feeling. Now move your attention to your physical body. Just notice where you're feeling tight in your body, there's tension anywhere. Don't try to fix it, just notice where that is. Where's that tightness? Keep your breath going. Lovely slow exhale. Notice also in your body where there might be looseness, comfort. Bring your attention and keep the breath going to what feels comfortable. While being connected to your body, just take 2 more lovely long breaths. If your mind wanders, don't worry. It's natural, it's normal. Just say breath and let go. Feel the rhythm of your breath as your chest and your abdomen expand. Expand as big as they can. And finally, I want to bring your attention to your mind. Notice and check in on your thoughts. What's in there? Your thoughts aren't you. Thoughts are fleeting, they're coming, they're going. Just notice them. Love them. And keep the deep breaths going. While noticing our thoughts, please take 2 beautiful deep breaths. Exhale, nice, slow exhale. See if you can get that breath down into your belly area. Really deep. Beautiful. Now, when you're ready, I want you to slowly open your eyes if they were closed. I'd like you to stretch your hands and arms up above your head, just stretch out. Or indeed, I'm having a lovely stretch here myself. Or indeed, if it's your legs, whatever you feel you need to stretch, or both. And then just come back into the room with Sally and me.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much for that. That was actually, for me, very quite relaxing. So I actually just put my mic on mute and I kind of followed through with your voice as well. So thank you so much for taking us through that journey. And I think a lot of the members in the audience are currently, that has kind of gone through that, are also kind of thanking you for taking us through that. That was truly amazing and very relaxing.
And there's lots of phone apps, you know, with that. And some of us might find that a good habit. You know, we were talking earlier about new habits at this time, and maybe even a 3-minute, 5-minute pause could be the thing for you.
Definitely. I think we've, from the audience, we've received some very, very interesting questions that I would like to kind of also just give time to for us to address. One of the questions that we received is, how does a founder cope with the tough decision of letting people go when it's inevitable? And how can they make that decision easier on themselves as well as on their team? And that's definitely a very, very difficult topic of discussion. However, very critical and very important. And I would love if you can kind of share your thoughts on that, Linda.
Yeah, and it's a very emotional thing, isn't it, Sally, to let or to feel that responsibility on you for the team and that you may have to let them go. First of all, just my mantra for today: be kind to yourself. This is not your fault, number one. And secondly, be as humane and compassionate with the other person as possible. One of the things that happens when people are let go is that they inevitably blame themselves. They think maybe they weren't good enough, or, you know, at a logical reason, they know it is the recession or the pandemic or whatever. But internally, they often beat themselves up. So I think you need to do an awful lot of reassurance that it isn't about them. And I think you need to really say how you value those people and what specifically, make it very personal, what specifically you valued about them when they were on the journey with you. Reassure people that you will be happy to give them excellent references. Do what you can and choose. It's very difficult, actually. I think now, I hadn't thought of this, Sally, but I'm thinking, you know, normally if we've to let people go, we would do it face to face. Yes. However, the truth is, because of social distancing now, or cocooning, we'd have to do this virtually, you
And
know?
that just adds to how hard that
Yeah.
entire experience can be.
But one little tip I would give, and this was talking to someone yesterday in Australia who had to let a bunch of people go out of their executive search team because that market has crashed. You know, giving people the message that they're being let go, but then checking in maybe that evening or the next day with a phone call just to say, how are you doing? So you have to deliver the message. That has to be professional, as humane and compassionate as you can, but just then follow up with a phone call. Because people may not, they can be in a bit of shock, you know, and it's only the next day they may have questions or they may have some things they need to sort out that they don't think of at the moment when you're letting them go. I don't know if that's helpful. Again, I'd love to know what others feel is good practice for them right now.
Definitely. No, I think that was actually very, very useful. And you sharing that mantra of be kind to yourself, it's not your fault. And I think that also relates to the other question that we've received about feeling so out of control, and what can you do about that? Because again, a lot of the impact that's happening on businesses and founders, teams, families, and even friends, a lot of it is out of our control. And I think this is it's a big part of why people feel very uncomfortable and maybe challenged during these times, because it doesn't seem like you are able to affect or make an effect or an impact in some way. And that balance or imbalance actually between not being able to have control over the things around you um, is something that's really being challenged for a lot of founders and entrepreneurs currently. And so just going back to that question, how does one deal with that? How does a founder deal with that?
Yeah, I think two things come up for me in that question. The first is that just acknowledging that we can't control this. This is something the world has never experienced. It is having unbelievable knock-on effects. Um, so just acknowledge that. But in the same moment, try to find some things that you're in control of. And it might be as simple as things people put earlier. You know, I have, you said you had your lunch at a set time, you get up at a set time, you ring your family at a set time. Think about what new habits can you control, and that will give you some comfort. The other thing I think that comes up for me, and this may be common, I'd love our founders and entrepreneurs to share in this. Entrepreneurs tend to be people who are, I call, are very agentic. Agentic people are people who believe they are self-directed, they are masters of their own destiny, they are go-getters, they are self-motivated, driven people. They are, you know, typical qualities of what we love about entrepreneurs. And I think for people, and at times I can see part of that in myself. And therefore, just to know that we're going to find not being in control harder than maybe some others who may be more used to following in a path, you know, less self-directed, more kind of uh, accepting of instructions and directions from people. They're just my thoughts at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it would be very interesting to kind of hear from the audience as well what they think about that. I definitely resonate a lot with what you were just kind of talking about, because I think essentially it was very easy for a lot of us to kind of just jump into execution mode and just worry about the things that are in their hands, because it helped them
Mm.
feel in control and help them feel that they're able to do something. And at the same time, I think and I just want to maybe just mention this, that for me at least, one downside of that was that it made me feel maybe slightly disconnected, because I was very much focused only on the things that I could control, because that gave me that comfort. And so it kind of also kind of put me somewhat in a denial place in terms of acknowledging everything that is being there. And I think we've kind of talked about different things, and I think a lot of this is kind of more of a dance back and forth
Mm.
between being able to stay in control of the things that we can do, but also still acknowledging the things around us and being mindful about them and their impact as well.
And at some level, I think, you know, like the phoenix rising from the ashes, the entrepreneur's mind will find opportunities ultimately in this. That is my belief.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I just, now that you kind of mentioned it, I just wanted to, this is something that we've kind of discussed a few days ago, which is the concept of learned optimism and the impact of that for entrepreneurs and for founders and for people in general. And I'd love for you to kind of share your thoughts on that. What is learned optimism and what does that mean and how does it come into practice in our daily lives?
Yeah, the concept of learned optimism, Sally, was developed by Martin Seligman. And Martin Seligman is kind of the father of the positive psychology movement. And what he learned really was that you could train people to be optimistic. I think that often we had this view people are either pessimists or optimists. You know, you were born that way. And what they have noticed is that optimists tend to attribute all their success in life to themselves. They say, well, I did it. I made the right choice. I hung out with the right people. I worked hard. I got a great degree. I persuaded the funders, the investors. So optimists take credit for their success, but for their failures, they often have this ability to say, well, it wasn't my fault. It was a bad economic crisis at that time. And this is interesting because I think that those of us who are naturally optimistic, and of course we can all learn these skills to be more optimistic, coming through the pandemic, we're not going to feel limited by that because that was not our fault. Pessimists, on the other hand, um, believe that failure is because of something they did not do right. And they also believe that their success is due to chance and good fortune. You know, I was lucky in that exam. The book I read right before the exam, the questions were based on that. Or I did well in that presentation because my boss mentored me beforehand. So they attribute their successes to others and other events. So you can see the huge benefit of optimism and learned optimism as we come through the pandemic. And, you know, what they also noticed was, say, in insurance companies, that the best salespeople are all optimists. And actually, when they were hired, most insurance companies provide optimism training to their sales force, because the way they look at it is, if I have to do 20 pitches and everybody says no till the 20th, I get a sale on the 20th. Well, I just know the numbers and I'm saying, well, that's one closer to where I need to get to. I don't feel put down, whereas the pessimist would feel very discouraged maybe after 2 or 3 hang-ups after a cold call, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, and I thank you so much for sharing that, Linda, because I think we tend to think of those words, optimist and pessimist, in slightly of a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that you did mention is that you can acquire these skills. So just a small word of maybe insights for anyone that kind of feels that they're maybe on more of the pessimist side, and they tend to kind of think of what they did wrong whenever things, for example, don't work out, or they actually attribute a lot of the success to others, not necessarily to them. How do you suggest that they work on acquiring learned optimism? How do you go ahead and kind of make that a part of what they do and acquire that skill?
I think the key thing is being able to reframe. So any situation that we're in, we can interpret it in multiple ways. So, you know, if we are a bit more on the pessimistic scale, we tend to, when we have a setback, think, oh, that always happens me. I never do well in exams. You know, if you fail one exam, I never do well in exams. I'm no good at exams. So the way you reframe is that, and this is what optimists do, it's not that they're unrealistic, but they say, I didn't do well in that exam, or that person didn't respond well to my investment pitch. It's not all people, every time, in every situation, and forever and ever again. So it's really the ability to reframe and to make whatever setback, it's specific to that moment. You take what you can learn out of it, and next time will be different. I'm resetting the clock.
Yeah, yeah, and I think with that kind of reframing, and just by putting it in different words, just as you kind of suggested, uh, brings about some sort of hope or some sort of kind of potential for change in the future. And I think that's really kind of key, in terms of being able to do that switch, and be able to kind of create some kind of a future potential for the things that we go through.
Yeah, be interesting, Sally, to know even within the audience. And again, I'm conscious of time for people, but how many people they would feel they were naturally optimists, and how many people would feel they're naturally, maybe more naturally, pessimistic, or as some people like to call it, I'm realistic.
Yes, and I think just to kind of help kind of people share with that, and I think a lot of the audience members have been great sharing a lot of their experiences and being very open with us. And I think it will be useful for us to share where we're at as well. Me and you, I know for myself, I luckily I think I fall more on the optimist side. However, I do think it has to do with where I'm at. So it could be if I'm going through, for example, a long year or a tough year, and things, for example, are not working out well in certain fronts, then I do notice that I do fall into a very pessimist state of mind, where there's self-blame that's involved, and all of these things kind of start to kind of come up, starting with the smallest things in the day that might go right or might go wrong. So I'm also kind of curious, and I'd love for you to kind of also share where you're at as well.
Yeah, I think I'm naturally very optimistic, but under stress, I can go to the place of everything is falling apart. You know, if you know, maybe I was running late for something, I might then go to the catastrophe mindset. This whole day now is going to be a disaster, you know, because
Yes, yes.
I was late for that, so I'm going to be late for everything now for the rest of the day, you know. And there's three simple dimensions. It's like, when something bad happens, do we say this always happens me, or something, everything else is going to be affected, or it's all my fault? There are three kind of places we go to usually when bad things happen. Even as optimists and pessimists go to those. So we'll have one of those that we tend to go to more often, and it's managing that.
Definitely, and I think just kind of going through people's messages on the chat, I think we have an overwhelmingly optimist audience. I think Mayasa mentioned that she's an unshakable optimist, and I think it's very kind of refreshing to kind of hear people
Yes.
still be optimistic and have a very positive view on everything that's happening. And I definitely do commend everyone as well that's also sharing where they're at and their experiences, because it's very challenges to stay to and have an optimistic and positive view on things.
Yeah, and thanks. I think that, you know, for those of us who have that optimistic streak or those who want to develop it, because it can be learned, that is the key thing. Um, I think that's what will make us flourish when all this is over, and whatever the new normal is or the new reality is. It's that ability to reframe and see opportunity.
Definitely. And just to kind of go back to one thing that you kind of mentioned in a previous discussion, is that with all of this kind of comes hope, and with hope comes action, and with action comes change, or a better opportunity. And I think that's something that's very important for people to also kind of understand and highlight the importance of.
Yeah, yeah. Hope.
Um, yes, definitely. And I think just kind of last words from you, and I think I'm also very conscious of people's time. I think we've kind of addressed all the questions that were brought up, but if anyone wants to kind of ask something or would like Linda to address something, please go ahead and write it in the Q&A session, and we can go ahead and also tackle that. I think we have a couple of minutes before we would wrap up. So while people kind of write in their last questions or their final thoughts, any from you, Linda, anything from your side?
No, just to say it's been a pleasure having this opportunity to talk. I've even found it very uplifting myself, and to, you know, have this connection with our audience. And great conversation with you, Sally, and with the audience. And, you know, I can see that people are acknowledging what's going on, but finding their own way through it. So I applaud that.
Definitely, and I definitely do want to thank everyone that has been tuned in and sharing everything that they did on the chat, because it's truly, I think, in the times that we're kind of going through, it's very refreshing to have a safe space for us to be able to share these experiences, for us to be able to kind of just talk and resonate with each other's experiences, and understand that a lot of what we go through is not necessarily just us, but everyone within our community and within our network is also going through similar things. So I'd like to also give a special thanks to everyone that's been listening in and been sharing and very open about what they're going through as well.
Great. Stay well and healthy, people.
Definitely. Stay well and healthy, as Linda said. And we're definitely having this session being recorded. And this is something that we'd love to also share with everyone, just so they can get a chance to kind of reflect on, and also share with other people that you think might kind of need to hear those words, or be able to hear those experiences. Thank you, Linda, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And hopefully we see you guys next week as we tackle another topic with our weekly webinars.
Great. Oh, Sally, we should mention that I am in Slack, and maybe I can share some resources for people in there if people want to join the Slack conversation. And I'm also offering some pro bono coaching if anybody wants to reach out to me.
Thank you so much. I think that's very, very generous of you. We're going to share that with everyone here, which is the link to the Slack channel that we've created, which is that has different members of the ecosystem, just to kind of create an open line of communication and to help support people through some of the things that they're going through. And I'm going to make sure that everyone kind of receives that, if not through the chat, then by email. And we look forward to kind of having you guys also contribute and be a part of that Slack channel and a lot of the conversations that are taking place on that. Great. So I think if that's it, I think everyone, we've set a good break midday, and hopefully everyone's ready to kind of go back into their days, and hopefully be productive and take a lot of what we have shared and what Linda has kind of mentioned as insights into their day, to hopefully kind of be able to navigate these times better.